So, everybody, last night, Kevin McCarthy finally secured the number of votes necessary to become Speaker of the House, only after a very dragged out fight with the Freedom Caucus, led by Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert, who launched their own version of a force the vote campaign. This, of course, renewed debate on the left side of the aisle when many in independent media 2 years back pushed the Force the Vote campaign of their own. Now, that didn't go anywhere because our squad isn't as tough as the Republicans' squad, but many in independent media were really pushing them to grow a spine and force the vote back then. So we are more or less all versed in what happened back then, but I do want to play this clip of Briahna Joy Gray because she not only gets into the merits of force the vote, which we've all heard a million times, but she calls out some of her indie media peers in this segment of her monologue about having flip-flopped on the strategy. So let's take a listen.
Instead of choosing that moment to fight, to highlight the corruption of the Democratic Party, and to lead a genuine populist movement that stood a chance of waking people up to the limitations of the two-party duopoly, something curious happened. A call seemed to go out to leading figures in the progressive media that they should drop Force the Vote. Although I first heard of the idea from Sam Seder, host of the YouTube show Majority Report, who said he supported Jimmy Dore's idea despite having a long-standing feud with Jimmy. He quickly changed his tune, alluding to a call he'd received that discouraged this approach. A call from whom? We could only guess. The legacy left media all quickly turned against the idea, with large accounts like the Young Turks, Majority Report, and others spreading outright misinformation about the risks of what might happen if the squad declined to vote for Nancy Pelosi.
All right. And that misinformation that she is referring to is, of course, the fear-mongering that Kevin McCarthy, at that time the minority leader, could have become Speaker of the House. And she goes on to mention, as we've mentioned, look what didn't happen this time. Hakeem Jeffries, despite being the leading vote getter in the first dozen-plus rounds, didn't end up Speaker because he never had a majority and never could have a majority. That's what she was referencing there. But she calls out her fellow indie media people, including Sam Seder and the Young Turks. Now, right around this time, of course, TYT is covering this whole thing, mocking the Republican clown show. A clown show, meaning debate and argument, right? That constitutes
like
a
democracy.
Right, like democracy, like people arguing on the House floor.
Whoa.
You ever hear that thing where the Senate is a deliberative body? The House, the Senate, the halls of Congress, it's a forum for debate.
Right.
Negotiation.
Right. Actually exercising their constitutional rights and duties as elected officials.
Right.
What an idea. Gosh, they never did that in the founding of the nation. It was never conceived to be done that. They had no arguments.
I hear that the Constitutional Convention was just one afternoon. I heard they met for a half an hour.
Yeah,
and
they had some tea. They were still kind of British back then.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the fact that this debate has been revived isn't lost on the audiences of a lot of these shows. And so Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks,
which is very embarrassing for them. And that's why, if you're wondering why they're attacking Briahna Joy Gray so much right now, I don't want to overuse this term because it seems like a term that really bubbled up from the shit libs and they really overuse it. But come on, man, these guys are grifters. Majority Report, TYT, they're grifters. And this whole thing is the worst thing that could have happened to them. They are furiously trying to control the narrative because now it is so obvious that they misled their listeners. Even the kindest possible interpretation that they were mistaken, they won't admit it. They will. If they came out and said, "You know what, guys, we were wrong," that might actually give them a little bit of credibility.
Right.
But they don't realize that, so they're furiously trying to spin this, but it's unspinnable. It's so obvious that they were completely wrong, and it's pretty obvious that they functioned as controlled opposition. And what Briahna said there, that Sam got a phone call. That he got a mysterious phone call. That's about the worst thing you could be accused of in an alternative left space. This is very bad for all the bad actors at that time.
Well, here is a call in to TYT. It was a super chat, which whoever gave TYT a super chat, I mean, come on. They got $20 million in a duffel bag from Jeffrey Katzenberg. You're giving them super chats? I mean, really?
I'm gonna give you a little fun fact here. So sucker, actually, it's well known that in New York, Yiddish kind of entered the English language through the Jewish immigrants. We don't talk as much about how Gaelic entered English through New York. So sucker actually comes from sukar, which is Gaelic expression kind of meaning a fat fellow ready to be fleeced like a sheep. So that guy's definitely a sukar who gave TYT a super chat.
Well, they got on the air, whoever they were, because they asked Anna, hey, maybe was forced to vote not such a bad idea after all? Now, keep in mind, this was a few days ago. This was before McCarthy won, right? McCarthy won last night. So this was a few days ago. Here's Anna Kasparian on Briahna Joy Gray and forced to vote.
I want to read one super chat because it asks an important question. I actually was tempted in talking about this a little bit in the previous segment, but I decided against it. Now I'm going to. The question is, can you explain how this force the vote is different than Dems force the vote? There are lots of force the vote proponents who say AOC should have done what the Republicans are doing now with Pelosi in 2020. Well, remember, force the vote was about withholding votes for Nancy Pelosi's speakership role until she made the concession that there would be a floor vote on single-payer health care in the House, which would have failed. Okay, so the ask was for a vote that would fail. I mean, I at this point, I almost just wish that it would have happened because I would give anything to have Briahna Joy Gray move on with her life and maybe talk about something different. Like, it's ridiculous. But this McCarthy situation is different because the concessions that McCarthy has agreed to don't even matter for the group of Republicans who refuse to vote for him, okay? They don't care about the concessions. They don't trust him, and they've said so. They don't trust him. They're not going to vote for him. It's not about concessions.
Okay, so now, we know for a fact that that is complete horseshit. It was about concessions. Now, you could say she didn't have the foresight to know that he was going to win. You didn't need the foresight to know that he was going to win in order to know that, yes, it was about concessions. After the first day of voting, after McCarthy lost 3 times, and then they said, okay, let's take a break and come back because it's too embarrassing. We can't have him lose 8, 9, 10 times on the first day, right? After they took a break on the first day, Lauren Boebert went on Fox News and she told this to Bret Baier. She said, just last night, 2 colleagues and myself walked into Kevin McCarthy's office and presented him a very common sense proposal, a deal that got him 218 votes, the gavel on the first ballot, and he smugly rejected that. So what was the deal? She says it was very common sense things like putting forward a border security bill, putting forward a term limits bill, having a measure in place where any member of Congress who offers an amendment to reduce the federal debt, well, that's made an order. And there were so many other things that were common sense and even requests that he had made of us that we presented to him. And right now it is seeming very difficult for Kevin McCarthy to come back around and pick up those votes that I had in hand for him last night. So Lauren Boebert tells Fox News, no, I met with him the night before with a list of demands. What were the first 2 demands? Let's check the transcript one more time. A border security bill and a term limits bill being brought to the House floor for a vote. Now, she was not demanding that McCarthy whip enough votes to pass both of those bills. She was simply asking him to guarantee that those bills would be brought to a floor vote.
Right.
So
and even if they pass
demands.
the floor, the Democrats have the Senate. So they're demanding bills go to the floor that won't pass.
Right, exactly. So it's the exact same. It's the exact same dynamic as force to vote, right? And as we're going to find out in a few minutes, they got both of those concessions and more. But let's let Anna finish first.
The whole force the vote thing was about an ask that would have ultimately failed and could have potentially hurt single-payer healthcare or the pursuit of single-payer healthcare because maybe some who might be open-minded to it would be less open-minded to it if it's already failed through a House vote. You get what I'm
this
saying?
is not even worth. I mean, that is just unbelievably, twisted. I mean, I don't even know where to start with that. Yeah,
it's so dumb. It's such a dumb take. This entire segment is just unbelievably stupid. There's not one thing she says that even makes sense on its own premises.
Exactly.
It might have hurt Medicare for all, but no, because everybody thought that most of the people in Congress are completely uncorrupted by the insurance industry.
Right, exactly.
And that Medicare for all, you know what? It got voted down. I guess we need to move on. No,
And
that's how you build momentum, you fucking idiot. If people thought like this in the suffragette movement, you wouldn't be on this show because you wouldn't have the right to vote, Anna.
Look, whatever you feel about the Medicare for All ask is really besides the point. You and I didn't think the Medicare for All floor vote was the best ask. We didn't even think there should have been an ask.
No. We thought that they should have just made Nancy Pelosi a non-starter.
Exactly. Basically, just deny her the vote outright. Don't make any demands. Just say no, pick someone else.
I'll grant you what they did to McCarthy, where if that was part of what they got out of him. Pelosi, of course, always being protective of her own power, she changed the rule. It used to be that anyone could demand a vote of no confidence in the speaker. She changed it to it has to be fully half of the party that the speaker's a member of have to vote to do that.
Right.
They got McCarthy to go back to the one vote rule. Now, if they had demanded that of Pelosi and they had the credibility to threaten that, because if they had put her through that to get the speakership, they would have had the credibility to threaten to use that in negotiating. Okay, then maybe you could have put Pelosi in.
Well, look, these are debates that you could have. Right? Nobody was saying everybody had to agree on what the ask should be. But that wasn't what their concern was.
I thought it should have been a lot more than Medicare for all. And these people are losing their minds over that one simple, basic, obvious, very light ask. Really,
well, they're pretending to lose their minds over it because they think that they can trick their audience into thinking, oh, well, that vote would have failed anyway, so it wasn't worth doing. That's why they're latching on to that. The main point is that you should have extracted something from her in exchange for your support, or you could have just said, if you wanted to be really hostile, you could have just said, no, we're not voting for her. She already had her turn. Pick someone else, right? But they didn't want to do either. Once they found out that the squad didn't have the balls to back this, they changed their tune because they are invested in the success of the CPC squad, the whole lot of them, right?
But at this point, I don't even care. I wish it would have happened so we could just move on. I'm so tired of the personal branding exercises that are forced upon us day in, day out by people who can't move on from something that happened literally in 2019 or 2020. But let's move on. There's other stuff to get to. I want to read.
All right.
In those ancient times, what was that? The Bronze Age, right, Anna?
Yeah, 2019.
The Bronze Age. I don't think they had steel yet.
Exactly. Well, now, of course, we know that everything she said in that monologue, especially in the first minute of that monologue, was total nonsense. It was total nonsense. They weren't going to deny him outright no matter what. Turns out the concessions actually did matter. What do you know? They actually played hardball and won. So let's take a look at the concessions that they got out of Kevin McCarthy, who is now Speaker of the House, because and only because he gave in to several, not just one or two, but several key demands from the holdouts. So let's read them. McCarthy's concessions, thanks to the Daily Mail for this graphic. Single member vote to oust Speaker, meaning anyone, this is what Russell was talking about earlier, anyone can prompt a vote to replace him if he doesn't do things that they want him to do. Votes on lawmaker term limits and border security, those two floor votes. They forced him to agree to those floor votes. Freedom Caucus members on Rules Committee. Pro-McCarthy PAC stays out of safe primary races. That's a key one. In other words, no establishment meddling in safe primary districts. That's something. Can you imagine?
So
can
they
you
can't,
imagine
they can't
Pelosi
pull a
agreeing to
Nina
that?
Turner. They can't
Right,
pull a
exactly.
Nina Turner.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Could you imagine the
They
Democrats
have the same
conceding to that?
problems that we have.
Exactly. Select Committee on Weaponization of the DOJ. Again, not a particularly right-wing cause there. 72 hours to read a bill before going to the floor and reveal salaries of government officials. So they got quite a bit. And what did it cost them? It cost them a few days of rough press, which is what the squad is terrified of. The squad will never be able to endure that. Right.
Why?
Exactly. Why? In 6 months, no one is going to remember this floor fight. It's going to be ancient history. McCarthy is there, but because of this floor fight, he has to play by certain rules, right, that they set up for him. And, first item there, a single member can vote to oust the speaker. So one of his concessions made him more vulnerable in that spot.
Right.
So this was obviously a huge success. It did not blow up the Republican Party. It caused a squabble for a little less than a week. That's politics. That's how it's supposed to work. In 6 months, people are not going to remember this. They're not going to remember this. This is not fracture the party. Yeah. Well, this did not hurt the Republican Party as much as
they couldn't even pick a speaker. They couldn't even. Did you see that? It was chaos. The Republicans don't know how to govern.
Fucking talking about that shit right into 2024.
Just absolutely awful takes there from Anna Kasparian. And yeah, you could see she singled out Briahna Joy Gray in that video.
She's exposing them. She's exposing them for the miserable hacks that they are at best, and more likely controlled opposition based on her story about a phone call. Who called him? Who called him? I mean, if I had to guess, it was a member of the squad. But Anna really should not be talking about Briahna Joy Gray, because Anna's background in journalism is quite dubious. In fact, we dug up a really interesting piece of investigative journalism that she did with TYT back when she did field work. And what they really wanted to know, what they felt was really earth-shaking, was to find out if a woman, if she wears a short skirt and throws herself at a guy in a mall, can get him to buy her a pair of shoes.
Yeah, let's take a look.
Over there, what happens?
So we go, and I start trying on some shoes, and I found a pair that I liked, and I looked at him, and I said, "Do you like these?" And he's like, "Yeah, they look good." And I was also wearing a skirt, so I tried on these really nice heels. And I started walking around in them. I'm like, "You really like them?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, since you like them so much, you want to buy them for me?"
Oh, I can't. No, come on. This is Class A stuff. Okay.
And I was expecting him to be like, "What? Yeah, right," or something. And he was just like, "Well, how much are they?"
You got them.
Oh, come on.
I got a new pair of shoes.
Stanford, everybody. Look at this.
Look at this.
Yeah.
So that was about 15 years ago. I think Briahna was probably in law school at the time, if my estimated timeline is right.
Yeah. So that's the kind of important work that she was doing while Briahna was at Harvard Law, and here she is now. I don't understand exactly what her qualifications are, and you could tell that she's the same fundamentally stupid person who did that bit. And look, youth is no excuse. I never would have done a show like that. Never. I never would. It never would have crossed my mind at any age. Well, okay, maybe when I was 15, but they're not 15 here to do a show with these kinds of themes and these kinds of setups. It's so obviously, and anyone who watches this show knows that, you know, I'm no wokester, but that doesn't mean I'm not woke in the real sense. I don't like seeing women degraded. Like, that would never have appealed to me because it's so obviously degrading to women. And if I were in a position of power, as I was, as a pretty young person running my own theater companies where I dealt with actors, it's a very similar thing. I would never have sent someone out to do something like that.
Yeah, this guy could have been the Harvey Weinstein of Harlem right here. But he wasn't.
It would never occur to me to ask an actress to do something like that. Like
well,
that,
look, I mean, the concept of TYT has morphed over the years. Obviously, in these early days, this was 15 years ago, it was like the YouTube version of the Howard Stern show, which seemed marketable at the time, right? And it obviously was because it got them going. 2016, right? They marketed themselves as what a lot of people hoped they would continue to be, which is the anti-establishment leftist Bernie movement's sort of media outlet. But then once that faded away and after Trump won, they became just an online version of MSNBC because that's where they thought the action was. So they've actually reincarnated a few different times since they went on the air at first. And this is just the latest thing. It's just the latest thing. But as this episode has proven, there is no doubt. There's no doubt who had it right.
Please clap.